Okay, so right from the outset, I'll apologize. My voice probably sounds horrible, and there might be some coughing and sneezing during this tutorial. I have the flu right now. But I want to try to provide some help to all of you in class since I wasn't there today. So you all sent me files, things that you're working on. I thought as long as I can sit here at the chair today, try to provide some critique, I guess, and some tutorials that would apply to individual projects as well as um, stuff that might be valuable to everybody. And this one I know for sure. So I'm using Kenma's file. Um, but at this point of these projects, in this point of the semester, timing and spacing is still a difficult thing to figure out, like how all the little nuances of it. So I'm going to take this just one little scene. For the most part, I think I'm not going to play the whole entire animation that Kenma has set up, but it's looking really good. Lots of interesting action going on and appropriate use of props in that. I just want to look at this one little shot here where, the basics of this, the blocking of it, right? The idea of the character is going to back up and hit the wall and falls on its back. Now, to be fair, um, Kenma might look at this and just say, well, I haven't got to the other parts because I'm still kind of blocking it out, which we totally understand, and I can imagine that's the case. But just in case, I wanted to show just how some tweaks in the graph editor and ways to think about the timing and spacing here want a little more snap. So I'm just going to play this a couple times. And I guess the main thing here is that it kind of moves up to the wall and maybe there's a little pause and then it falls back. But there's not really a whiplash, right? There's no snap when it hits that. So we're just going to look at some things. I've demonstrated a little bit of this in class, but maybe, in fact, maybe I showed this individually to people, and but I want to talk about how to manipulate the curves in the graph editor. Okay, so where to go with this? So let's just let's try to break this down as we're moving along. I've scaled this down, so I'm just looking from frame 60 to 146 because that's when that action is. This is basically the scene within the boxy slams the wall camera, right? So if we look at this, if I look at the little axis over here, you can see this is the Z that we're looking at. And the character backs up. Okay, that's all working. Now I'm going to kind of mess with everything. Oops, sorry, my stupid little mouse. But you can see it moves forward on this Z, and then it pauses for a frame, and then it starts to fall back, and it falls back fairly well, and it hits this little spot. So most of this is really good, but a couple tricks. In fact, since we're just looking at this little section here, in fact, it's not even that. Let's look at this little section. I'm just going to hit F for frame. In fact, you know what? I think it probably works better if I just look at the whole thing, because we can really see the steepness of this curve, right, where this changes. And it works pretty much as a constant. It's kind of slow out of the gate, and then it comes up here, and then it gets to this peak. And then the other thing that's going to happen is it's, kind of pauses for a frame. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select that keyframe right there. And as a default, Maya creates these keyframes, and these are the default preferences. You can totally change your own custom defaults. But it tries to do these auto smooth keys, and in certain places it tries to make it fall along the tangency of the curve, the direction of the curve, right, if you want to think of it that way. And other times it tries to flatten it out. But what I want to do here is be able to control it so that, at least currently where we're at, if I want to leave this flat, but I want this to be steep, because I don't want it to come up here. If this is flat, it's literally slowing down a little bit, just a tiny bit, before it hits the wall. Well, I don't want that. I want it to be going its fastest, actually, when it hits the wall. Poor little boxy. So what I'm going to do is break the tangency, the tangent curves, right? And this little icon right here, in fact, I had it up there. If I roll over, you can see it says break tangents. And it gives me this V little shape, right? So I'm just going to click on this, and we get a new representation of these tangent handles. And if I select this, I'm going to have the move tool here. And if I selected this handle, I can then start to bend it down, which is going to change the shape of this. So actually, before I do that, I'm going to just reposition this curve, right? So that it's a little bit slower at the beginning, and then I'll come back to this one. And I'll shape that, right? So that it's, in essence, pointing almost directly at it. And if I frame in on this, right, you can see slow, 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 fast, 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 and it's really getting faster the whole entire way. I really want some speed here, so I'm just going to manipulate the position of that curve. And let's just go ahead and play that. Right? So now it's accelerating, right, into the wall, but then it kind of pauses, right, when it falls back. And of course, that is because we have another keyframe here, right? So it's kind of slow and then builds up, and you'll see how much distance it covers in the last couple of frames, right? Sorry, stupid matching mouse. So it hits that wall, and then it kind of holds at that position, and then it makes its way out here. Actually, I think I don't need that keyframe. Now, if I was doing a lot of squash and stretch, but Boxy for this, it doesn't really have any controls. It could, right? But currently it doesn't have any controls for squash and stretch from front to back or side to side. It only has it from top to bottom. So I'm going to treat that as like a discipline, right? The whole idea that, well, Boxy can't do that. And if Boxy can't do that and can't squash and absorb its energy, I wish you could see me gesturing with my hands right now. The idea that it squashes and stretches on the tutorial, right? But if it's going to hit the wall and it can't squash and stretch, well, then it has to bounce off of it pretty quickly. And that could be the case because it's just not a squashy and stretchy material, right? The stuff that makes up Boxy, it's, you know, kind of steel or chrome or something, I don't know. So I'm going to select this keyframe and delete that. And just as I wanted it to hit really hard as it ran into it, I want it to immediately bounce off of it and then slow down as it rests. So again, you can see I have these tangencies, right? Or the tangent handles. Oops, so get that one, got my little move tool here. And I'm going to bend that one, and I'm also going to move that keyframe a little bit so that I get the kind of shape that I want out of this. You know, and if I need to, I'll just, right, and I can flex that however. In fact, let's do F for frame, see if I can see that curve. One thing I don't want it to do is dip, right? So this one's kind of flat. I don't want this to dip in such a way that it falls backwards. I don't want it to slide and get to here and then go past and come back. I don't want it to overshoot, right? So all I've really done is deleted one keyframe, repositioned these two, and then made this so that it's a really tight, you know, it races into this and then it races, I don't want to say race, bounces off that very quickly and then slows into that position. So let's look at that. Right? So this is kind of, I call this the Peter Griffin. If you guys watch Family Guy, but whenever Peter's in trouble and maybe doing things he's not supposed to or becomes injured, he falls rather fast, right? And that's kind of comedic effect, but also gives us a real sense of the gravity. All right, so let's do a couple other things to tweak this. So if I look at that, it hits, right? So it hits and bounces straight back. And the other thing too is you'll notice it kind of slowly falls back, right? So let's deal with the bend first. So right here, well, in fact, let's deal with the rotation first. I think this one's more obvious and it's related to that. So Kenma's done an excellent job rotating, and you know, because the pivot is set down here at the center bottom, not actually at the edge, but it really feels like it falls to me fairly well, like it falls on that edge. So I'm going to go to the rotate X, right? This is that X handle. I can see that it's red. And you can see, again, as it comes through here, it kind of hits, and then it slowly starts to rotate, and then it rotates, and just before it hits the ground, it kind of slowly eases into that. So same thing like we had before, maybe even more simple because we don't have the other curves there. So I'm going to select this one. I've broken the tangency, right? And then I'm just going to bend that so that it's kind of slow and then falls quickly. You can see basically from here, it's almost, was this 3 or 4 frames? 1, 2, and really covers a lot of ground in that last fall, right? Boom. So let's play that again. Right? All right, so last part, let's look at the bend. So as this comes along, it hits right up in here. We're just going to focus on this area. So again, I'm going to select those keyframes and hit F, just so I can frame in close to this. So the whole idea here is it hits the wall right here, and then as it pushes back, it's still in that bent forward position. Actually, what I would say is after it hits the wall, it should probably recoil, right? It's like the idea if I punch someone in the gut, the next frame would be the character bent over, right? Taking that blow. So, right, and it happens very quickly. And then it falls, poor little Boxy falls backwards, right? I'm going to take this one, and I'm just going to do a little repositioning. I'm going to keep this bent forward. And then it falls, you can see, well, that doesn't work very well because now it kind of like eases into that position. So I would say here, what we need to do is do a little oscillation, because what we want it to look like is that Boxy's head kind of whips and hits the ground kind of hard and bounces in essence. So I'm just going to put a couple more keyframes in here. Insert key, and I'll move this to a new time. I'm just adding some keyframes. I'm going to move them here in a second. Oops. And then we'll just insert another key. All right, so let's look at this. So here I'm going to hold it, and here I want this to be kind of flat. So I'm just going to select that keyframe again. I'll just select that, and over here in the graph editor, you can see the stats tell us this is frame 113, and then it tells us the value. Well, I just want that to be 0. Let's just go ahead and look at this. And, I'm going to leave it there for a second. I'm going to put this one up. Sorry, I've got my little scroll wheel on, and it keeps seeing my other. Right, so you can see it goes down here. We don't want that. We want this, and I'm going to make that. Ideally, it wouldn't be flat, but for the sake of speed, I'll just make that flat for now. And again, with both of these, because we want the head to basically bounce, I'm going to make both of these tangents again. I'm going to break them so that the bounce happens quickly. I don't want it to ease into any of this. I want it to happen fast. I want it to bounce, right? So let's look at this whole little animation now, just with these tweaks. So some of that happens, it happens quickly. You might be like, oh, but I can't see all of it. But remember, sometimes what you want to do is feel the animation, right? So here, this whole idea is of hitting it hard, because that's what would happen, right? This would be a very fast process. There's lots of little things we could try to animate if we wanted to, add a little more flair. But I guess the first point, those first little adjustments that I made were about the timing, right? I broke the tangency because the timing was that the character was easing into the collision and easing out of the collision and easing into falling backwards. And we didn't want that to happen, right? We want some snap in there. We want to be going full speed ahead when it hits the wall. And because it has an equal and opposite reaction, we want it to hit and bounce off quickly. Again, some of these, there's stylistic things that we could try to do. We could make it squash and stretch more, and there's little things like that. But some of it is kind of this cause and effect, rule of physics kind of thing that's going on embedded within these 12 principles. Okay, so a lot of little tweaks we could do, but I think just those few changes made a difference. Maybe I should have screen captured the earlier one. If we go back If you're watching this now on the tutorial, go back to the very first of the tutorial and play and compare the snappier version here and play the first one and tell me, I don't know, hopefully I made it better. We'll see. But look at those differences as you think about your animating. So timing and spacing. My thanks to Kenma for allowing me to use this, and I hope to do this with some of the other files as I open them up. So this is meant to benefit her, but everyone in this process.